Okay, this is the second part of my drawing tutorial. The first part we went over tools and the initial sketch. And in this second part, I'm going to go over developing the sketch. So I already have my initial sketch on here. It's just really light in my blue pencil. And the second step I'm going to do is going over those initial lines with my HB mechanical pencil and starting to develop some of the details. And while I'm doing this, I'm going to make sure that I focus on proportion. I'm going to constantly check my drawing against the reference photo to make sure that there isn't anything that looks really bad that needs to be addressed. And I'm going to use these light blue lines as my guide, basically, for what I've already done. So I'm going to, I think I'll pick the eye area to start with. And I'm just going to go in and start adding the details. The first thing I'm going to start with is the circle for the pupil. Okay, and I'm going to go in there, and before I was focused on working really quickly and in a very loose manner, and now I'm going to be a little bit slower and more deliberate. So I have the pupil in there, there's sort of a highlight in the eye that I'm going to add, so I know not to color that part in. And I'll go ahead and shade this area in. So when I'm starting the actual sketch as well and adding these initial lines, the other thing I want to look at and think about that also helps sort of break the drawing down and make it a little bit easier and more manageable is I really want to look at the dark areas, because those are really going to stand out. They're easy to look at and sort of pick apart, and they also provide a really good way to measure your proportions. So let's add, this sort of has an area around the eye. So I'm going to add 2 lines for that. Okay, so talking about dark areas, we have the pupil colored in, and you can see on the reference photo around the eye, like right in here, there's some really dark areas that sort of end in some feathers. So really quickly while I'm on this area, I can go ahead and sort of just make a general shape, and I can make it look better in a minute and add more details. But just to start. So really it's all about sort of breaking this down into manageable pieces that are less intimidating than looking at a photo and thinking, oh my God, how do I render that? So you can see I've just added this little sort of detail, and I can go ahead and color that in. And I'm working with HB lead right now, which is sort of more forgiving than a darker, softer lead. So if I'm really unhappy with something, I can just go back and erase it. So don't be scared to make mistakes. I do it all the time. So I'm also looking at this eye, and hopefully you can tell there's sort of a highlight on this lip. So I'm just going to go ahead and sort of leave that area open a little bit. Okay, and he's got a little bit of an eyelid, so I can sort of draw that in too. Make that area a little bit darker. Okay, and there's some sort of additional dark areas up here that I want to add in. And the thing is too, when I use these reference photos, I use it as a guide, but one of my very first art teachers said something that I still think about, and they said that basically when you're doing a drawing, you're telling a lie, right? There's not really an owl on this page, so if you can tell the lie in a good way, right, then you're selling the drawing and it'll work. But if there's a part that's in the reference photo that isn't rendering well for you, or it's just not working, you can sort of fudge it, right? As long as it sort of sells the lie. So if it looks good, then it's all right. So in other words, I'm not gonna panic or throw the drawing away if there's a part that's slightly off, right? Like we're artists, so we can sort of get away with the artistic license. Okay, so I have this whole sort of area around the eye blocked out, and I'm going to move on to this sort of dark section up here and around that goes around the eye. And again, I'm doing that just because I want to sort of get these dark areas blocked off and make sure that I get these proportions right. So I'm going to have a little bit of a squiggly line, and that sort of stops about right there. And I can sort of go in and sort of denote that really lightly, and then go back. And I'm doing it a little bit messy, but that's okay because that's what the smudge sticks are for, number one. And two, it's sort of interesting to see how the smudge sticks can work with the different pressure points on the pencil. So in other words, if you color this really evenly and lightly, it's much more, it'll smudge and spread much more evenly. But if you do it really hard, it'll keep a little bit of those lines, which is sort of what I want right now. So I'm going to go in here and just kind of map out some more of this dark area, which we can see continues on through this whole section in the ear right here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw these lines out. Okay, and that's going off the page. And let's get the top of the ear. And then it sort of breaks a little bit. The feathers on the top of the ear are a slightly different color. Okay. So then let's turn this and sort of color this whole section in really dark. And another trick that I really like to do, and it's another reason why I start in these dark areas, is because when I use the smudge sticks for blending, after you're blending all these dark areas, the smudge stick will have a lot of leftover graphite on it, and I really like to use that to do the subtle textures. So in other words, if there's like a little feather detail right here, and I don't want it with a hard pencil line, I can actually draw with the smudge stick, and it's a little more subtle, and it just looks really nice. I really like doing that. I use that a lot. Okay, so we have some of the dark areas in that ear done. So this is starting to shape up a little better, right? We look a little better than we did before. So let's just keep working. There's a darker section right here that sort of leads up to the beak. So let's sort of go ahead and draw the outline of that beak. Right, and again, we're working a little slower because we have our proportion down, so these lines we feel pretty good about. That goes up. There's a dark area right there. And there's some feathers that come out off the beak. And then that just sort of goes down like that. And let's go ahead and color in this top line right here. So if we look at that really closely, we can see there's sort of some feathers. It's not a solid line, in other words. There's some feathers coming out off of there. So we'll do that a little bit, not as a solid line. Okay. And draw that up and over. Okay, so there's still some dark areas that we're missing. This top portion of the head has a lot of dark areas. The beak has a dark area. All in here, there's some dark areas. So let's just start sort of tackling them one by one. Let's start, let's see. We've got some dark feathers down here. So let's just sort of block that out and color it in. And again, we can add the details as we go and sort of finesse it a little bit. Right now, I just want to get it blocked out and colored in so I can compare it to the reference and see where I'm at. So this beak is much darker. So this beak is interesting too because there's some feathers sticking out, covering it. It's not just a solid dark piece. So I'm going to sort of sketch in some feathers and color in around that. So this way, I can go back in and color around those areas and it sort of leaves that negative space. And by the end of this, I'll probably have gone over these dark sections at least 2 or 3 more times, depending on how dark they actually are and how much I want them to stand out. But again, we're just starting somewhere and sort of building on that. So, and there's a shine in the beak too that I want to sort of keep. That's a nice detail, so I won't color that whole thing in. Okay, there's some darker sort of feathered areas under there, so I'm just going to make a couple lines to represent that. And let's make some sort of darker feathers coming out from the eye. Now the next area that I want to look at is this sort of brow line. I don't really know what else to call it, right here. And I'm just going to draw in, again, some feathers and color around them to sort of represent where the dark feathers end and the lighter feathers go. So let's just start coloring that in. And because that's not a solid dark area, there's actually some different colored feathers in there. I might end up erasing some of it too, but for now we'll start with this. Sookie feels left out. She wants to contribute as well. Okay, so that is where we're going to stop the second video, and that is where we are at with the initial drawing that we've started.